The Trikirion of Literacy. Homo sapiens, 300,000 years ago, evolved into a runner, a fast, bipedal, long-distance runner that caused several mutations in the respiratory and articulatory system, and the side effect of those mutations was articulated language, because it was able to produce a great number of vowels and a great number of consonants, 5 or more vowels, 25 or more consonants. This led to the production of a great number of clusters of vowels and consonants, and those clusters were attached to elements in the surrounding environment, or feelings, or ambitions, ideas, and so on. Which means those consonants, those vowels, and the clusters they built together were symbolic, and they were part of Symboleracy of language. We don't have no evidence of it, of course, since it was so long ago. So the only evidence we can find about these Homo sapiens and their Symboleracy is what they have left behind in the caves they inhabited. So we jump straight away to one of those symbolic representation. Here we have the Symboleracy of a picture, which is a representation of an item. This item is a woman. We generally call it the Venus of Predmosty, which is in the Czech Republic at the present moment, but which is coming from the Pavlovian culture, which was 29 to 27,000 BCE. If we look at the picture, we find out that it is definitely symbolic. It represents a woman, but every single element in that woman are symbolic of something else. Let's start from the bottom. At the bottom we have the vulva, which is in the wrong direction in a way, but that enables it to be enlarged. The vulva is fundamental for impregnation, and it is a symbol of this impregnation. Then we have the stomach, with a belly button in the middle, and this is a symbol of the womb of the woman and of the birth of the child. And then we get to two big breasts, which are the symbols of feeding the child. Hence, the woman is a symbolical representation of the procreator she will become when she is impregnated, the procreator she will remain and develop while she is carrying the fetus in a womb, and the feeder she will be after birth for the child itself, that she will feed 18 months. This is symbolical of something fundamental, the fact that if there is survival of this community, it can only be through producing children. We'll see a little bit later how many and what happened to them. Then we can shift to another type of Symboleracy from there. This image that you have seen is accompanied by a ritual and ritualistic formulas and some language that might describe it and explain who she is. That's oral Symboleracy. Those words are symbols of a meaning. But around 3,500 to 3000 BCE, the oral Symboleracy is developing into a written Symboleracy. The first form I propose is cuneiforms. Cuneiforms are a writing system that is perfectly adapted to Sumerian. It's a mistake to say Akkadian. Akkadian is a Semitic language and doesn't have vowels except one, which is Aleph or Aleph, which is always at the initial of a word. Whereas Sumerian has 5 vowels, and those vowels are independent autonomous words of their own. The 2 examples I've given you, there, Ant and Amma, the father and the mother, you very clearly see that there is no obvious architecture. There are elements that are similar in both. The 2 little signs or the 2 little marks on the left at the bottom, vertical, that maybe can express the fact that those 2 elements are connected with family, with procreation, with other elements we don't exactly know, and I haven't found anything convincing as for the architecture of that script. Whereas when we move to Maya, it's quite different. The Symboleracy of glyphic Maya is a glyphic syllabary. Each glyph in a composite glyph, like the one I've given you there, has a meaning of its own and is symbolic of something that is its own. Then the composite is carrying a meaning that is actually the result of the composition of the 3 glyphs. On the left vertical, 3 bubbles, 1 empty in the middle and the others 2 with something inside. That's how 1 is represented in Maya. And 1 is Jun or Hun, according to the dialects. Here I have given you Jun. And Jun is 1. When it is at the initial of a composite glyphs, it means something that is superior, something that comes first. What comes first? And that's the other 2 glyphs. On top, horizontal, a simple glyph, Nal, which is maize. And it's a funny little glyph that nearly looks like a face of something. And then the 3rd one, under that Nal glyph, the last glyph, Ye, is a simple pronoun of the 3rd person, he, she, it, but in the context it has another meaning, which is revealed, hence divine. You add the 3 together, first, divine, maize, or first, maize, divine, that gives you Sun, Jun, Nalye, the name of the maize god. Then we can move to something else, which is another Symboleracy, and that one is, and we'll go back to the old caves, in those old caves all over the world you had dots. The point is to know what those dots represent. There are vertical lines of dots, big or small. There are horizontal lines of dots, big or small. There are non-straight line, but curving lines and so on. Those dots, we don't know what they represent, but at the same time, we've just seen the dots of the Maya, which are later, that's for sure. But the idea, the concept of using dots to represent numbers might have been a lot older than the Maya. And actually, those dots, and those pictures, I've borrowed them from the Musée d'Aquitaine in Bordeaux, France, those dots are in many ways essential, and they're connected to representation of animals, and we don't know if there are numbers or if there are a way of representing the name of the animal, or some kind of ritualistic event around this animal. What is for sure is that when you discover Alexander Marshak, who worked on those dots tremendously, you enter what is called by some the Paleolithic calendars. I've given you one which is from Abri Blanchard in some Castel Merle set of caves and abri, as they call them, that is overhanging stone, protecting an area under the overhanging stone. This one is, as you can see by the scribbling or the notes that are added, is identified as a lunar calendar. For Marshak, those kind of, and there are very many, line sets of organized dots are lunar calendars. And he says clearly, can only be. There's no alternative. And that's where we have to discuss. Because the lunar calendar is 28, 29 days. There's another cycle which is a lot more important. And that takes us back to the Venus of the Czech Republic. A lot more important, that is to say, the menstrual cycle of women. The menstrual cycle of women is essential to know when she can be impregnated and hence become pregnant and hence give life to a future baby and eventually to a newborn baby and eventually to a member of the community. For the community to survive in the very difficult conditions of those days, we have to have children. And we have to bring 3 of those children per woman to a full 29 years long life, which is the life expectancy of the species. To get 3 individuals to the end of the 29 years to have a full life expectancy life, we have to produce quite a few more children. Because miscarriages, because still death, because infantile disease, and there are many that we don't even know in those days, but probably very similar to those we know today. And those 3 things are wiping out 50% of the impregnated fetus who will never go beyond 5 years of age if they even reach birth. And then after those 5 years, and 50% of them, 6 out of 12, have been dismissed. Then you're going to have another 50% 25% of the original number, they are going to die because of other diseases, accidents, wild beasts, and a few other events. That makes, out of the 12 original ones that had been reduced to 6, that are reduced now to 3. And then you have the 3 that we need for the expansion, moderate expansion, but expansion, hence survival of the community. We can consider that those 2 cycles of being very similar can be literally overlapped one onto the other. But what is essential is that those kind of signs, that kind of architecture of dots with different types of dots according to how they are made, that implies that the people who produced that recorded something, a cycle of some kind, but at the same time knew quantities, new groups, and the number of dots in the group has a meaning. They had some kind of level of numeracy. If we go on with that numeracy, that's going to lead us to another dimension of symboleracy of human beings. It is the fact that those numbers, if you know them, they are only interesting if you can do the operations you can do with numbers: addition, subtraction, division, and multiplication. To do those kind of operations, you need to have some kind of a device, a machine. And that's where we come to techneracy. Just like writing was, in a way, the evolution of language into something that is produced by a pen or by something else, a brush, techneracy. We here have the necessity to have some kind of technical machine to calculate the numbers we want to calculate and the operations going along with it. And those are simple, but there are some of them very old. I gave you the Pascaline from Blaise Pascal, which is only 17th century, but it is a mechanical calculator. It works mechanically, whereas the other two, the abacus, Russian or Chinese, don't work mechanically, but work with your fingers, and you must know how to work those things. And finally, the digital one is a modern calculator. Those calculators are the techneracy of numeracy. All that is in a vast domain of symboleracy that is typically human. This or those technical devices are bringing humanity from the past to the future. I said with literacy that we jumped into something that requires some technical element with writing, but then later on it will be printing, and later on in 19th century it's even something else, to type a document, a letter, and so on. With a typing machine, the invention of the keyboard and the typing machine, that also all along bring new types of people, new types of jobs and professions. And that is essential. This new type of, the new profession of the typing machine is the typer that is using it with a keyboard. And that is essential because at this moment a profession appears, and I've given you there a vision of that profession, a vision of that world that has been produced by a typing machine from a poet, Guillaume Apollinaire, and his famous Zone poem in his collection of poems that is called Alcohol, and that was published in 1913, before the First World War. He will die in a war. That's very important to see that vision. I'm going to give you in English the 4 lines I've extracted from the very long poem. I saw this morning a pretty street whose name I've forgotten, new and clean from the sun. It was a bugle. The directors, the workers, and the beautiful shorthand typists. From Monday morning to Saturday evening, 4 times a day, pass by. And you have the capture of the beauty in what the industrial era produced, and there produced socially. It's not a machine that is described, it's a society. That leads me to a simple idea now, today, with artificial intelligence and the machines, computers and so on, that are ours. We are living in a world that is 100 or maybe 1,000 more complicated than the world at the beginning of the 20th century. But how can we cope? The only way is to understand that just the same way as the education that was decreed as compulsory, necessary, indispensable, unavoidable by Charlemagne in 789, actually, has grown from a few hours a week for a certain number of weeks, maybe a couple of years, has grown nowadays to 15 years, maybe even more if we take kindergarten into account, and we can reach an easy 20 years for some professions like engineers and so on. Education, more and more education to cope with the world. And that's where I disagree with Mr. Bornet-Pascal, and in his book Irreplaceable, he says that we don't need education. Most people might not need to know how those machines work. But if you want to understand why they make mistakes, if you want to understand why they manipulate you, if you want to understand why they are biased, and mostly if you want to correct the mistakes, the manipulation, and whatever you may find negative with them, you have to know how they work. Otherwise, you will become biased like them, you will be manipulated by them, and you will no longer be able to correct the mistakes, and you will reproduce all the mistakes they are producing. So there we come to another idea that is an opening window. Education, can everyone learn? Some people consider that everyone can learn everything, everyone can be a doctor tomorrow, everyone can be a Mozart tomorrow. That's absurd. Everyone is able to learn something new every day or lifelong, but only something new that interests them, that they consider as interesting, that they want to learn. Motivation and interest are essential in that kind of approach. You cannot be a learner if you're not a self-learner nowadays. And you cannot be a self-learner nowadays if you are not guided into it in a way or another. And this means guided self-learners can learn something by themselves all the time or lifelong, but only something that interests them, something they want to learn, something that is useful for them in a way or another. So the illusion of we are all able to become Mozart or a doctor, the illusion is also a utopia, if you want, is purely an illusion and nothing else. But the world we're going to produce, and we are producing, is represented by the last picture. You see, we are in France in that picture, so we run on the right. So you can see the cars are running on the right, in the right lanes of that bridge. But you have a bikeway, which is completely separated from the car lanes. And the bikes, there are two, that are running on that bike lane, are running against the car traffic. And that means that the lane there, the bike lane, is a dual lane. You can go one way or you can go the other way, and then you cross people, and you have to be careful when crossing another bike on the bikeway. But that's a vision of tomorrow's society. We won't all be driving cars, electric or not. We won't all be riding bikes, electric or not. We won't all run our bikes and run our cars on suspended bridges, on many roads, and many paths. It will be complete diversity. And it is that diversity that has to be used and trained and reinforced against manipulative technology. If we want to evade technocracy, we have to evade it with the diversity of the human species. And that's all. Good afternoon.